I wrote in chronological order, but backwards. I don't know. Was there a word for that? Uh, so I start with 1862 because that's the watershed event, was the war, and I just give the history of who was involved, what happened, when did it happen, and once the reader understands this huge tragic watershed event, then they can go back and kind of understand why. So the next 3 novels that I wrote take you back in history so that you can see how this all developed. How did the relationships between the native peoples and the government develop, between the settler colonialists and the natives, and how did the treaties and the reservation system kind of create this atmosphere where war eventually ensued. So I tell readers to start with the war itself, then go back and try to understand how that developed. And then my 5th book is really unrelated. As I said, it's an alternate history. That one is more for anyone who does know a little bit about the war, but wants to open up, be open-minded enough to think, well, what if it happened a little differently? How can I put myself in the shoes of the people that experienced this history?
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. Today I have someone on my show who has a lot in common with me. I love history. This gentleman has a podcast. He also helps people in the historical side around authorship. He's also an author himself. It's a lot of great things about having Colin on the show today. I'm excited to have him here. historythroughfiction.com is the website. We'll have links for all this as always. You know how we do things. I'd love for you to go check out Colin's podcast. It's great. It's got great guests, great stories, and really gives you some good insight into the author side. And it's a great compliment to what we try to do here on Living the Next Chapter. I'm thrilled to have Colin here. Colin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. It's nice to have another podcaster on. I feel like I have someone that I can nerd out about podcasting a little bit. So that's fun for me. Colin, tell everybody where you are in this great big world of ours.
I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I grew up in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I've moved around a little bit for school and things like that. But for the most part, I've usually been based here in my home state of Minnesota. And it's also where my business is based, although we connect with people throughout the world, readers and writers across the globe.
Where does your love of history come from, Colin?
I don't know if I want to define it as love.
Okay.
But my first real interest was as an athlete playing soccer, and I went to a university in West Virginia mostly to play soccer. I was always a good student, and I ended up with a liberal arts degree. It was a small liberal arts college, and it didn't have a whole lot of options. So I went with liberal arts. And after I finished my degree, I wasn't sure what to do with a liberal arts degree, and so I decided to get a graduate degree. And I chose a thing that was, history is interesting to me, and I was always very good at writing the essays for the tests. I'm less adept at the multiple choice type stuff, but when I can sit down and write out the answer in long form, I'm a lot better at that. So I decided to study history, and I just kind of continued down that path ever since. It definitely does hold my interest, and it's led me into this career. But I'm not like watching the History Channel every day, and I'm not consuming all kinds of history books all the time. I do here and there. But it's just kind of a part of my life rather than a love of my life.
Okay, great. And the idea that history repeats itself, if we don't learn from our history and our past, we're bound to make the mistakes again in the future. So I kind of like, it's like the rearview mirror in your car. You can see where you've been, but the rearview mirror is usually smaller than the windshield. The windshield's bigger because you're going forward most of the time. So we're always but I like to keep our eye on what's come behind us. There's a lot of great stories back there. And I love history in the sense that you get to travel back to a time that things were a lot different, and you try to put yourself into that situation. And sometimes it's really hard to imagine living in that time period. So as an author, it must be interesting to place yourself in that context and try to write from that perspective. When we have technology today, we're doing this together. I can see you over the internet. Back in the 1800s, they didn't have this. So when you write, you got to really try to transport yourself back there so that you feel relevant as an author. So that's why I love people who talk about history, and what you do, I think, is really important.
Well, the past is painfully relevant, and it's easy, like you said, to just look at the windshield and not the rearview mirror. And with everything that's going on in our world, you just forget that this has happened before, that the people before us, although they may not have had the same technological advances, still had the same experiences. And there's a lot to learn from what's gone on before us and how we handle the situations that we encounter today, rather than just feeling kind of helpless.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the podcast, because I have podcast listeners who are always looking for the next author podcast to fall in love with. Tell us more about your show and how did it start?
Well, my publishing company is called History Through Fiction, so we publish historical novels that are rooted in real historical events and people. And my podcast is just called History Through Fiction, the podcast, and I bring on authors that write historical fiction. Each episode is about 25 to 30 minutes, and I just sit down with an author, and I start out by talking about a book that they have coming out, and then we get into their author journey a little bit, and then a little bit more into their background, because a lot of authors, some are full-time, some are balancing other jobs and family life and things like that. So I try to get into a little bit of everything, so that whether you're interested in the content of the novel or you're interested in their work as an author, I cover all those things.
Okay. For History Through Fiction, how many authors generally are you working with at a given time?
Well, this is all a learning experience for me, and I started the press in 2019, and publishing a book, it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of steps to the process, so I couldn't really, I couldn't work with many authors. I started with one, then added another, and right now, this year, we're publishing, I think, 6 or 7 books, and we have 4 or 5 ready for next year. So at any given time, I'm working with several different authors in different stages of the publication process, whether it be editing, design, or marketing. And then I also do freelance editing, and book coaching. So I'm always working with several writers in that capacity as well.
Okay. So for people listening and they're curious, they're like, Dave, please ask, are you actually looking for clients right now? And people can reach out to you through your website?
Yeah, we are always looking for submissions. It's free to submit if you are publishing a full length. If you're looking to publish a full length manuscript, you just go to historythroughfiction.com/submission guidelines, and that's where you can find out exactly what we're looking for and what you need to submit. It's pretty straightforward stuff, just an author bio, cover letter, synopsis, that kind of stuff. And we do have an acquisitions editor, Robin, and all of the submissions go through a submission platform called Duosuma. And if we're interested, if we like the subject matter, if the writing is strong, if the subject is relevant, then it's something that we'll then request a full manuscript, because we always start with just submitting the first 10 to 15 pages. And then we go from there.
Okay, you've already mentioned a couple of these that are already answering my question in advance. Good job. What are some of the key things that you look for from a historical fiction author that brings their manuscript kind of up to the top of the list on your desk? And you're like, I'm going to take a second look at this one. There's something here. What stands out for you? What are you looking for?
Well, it's a little bit hard to define, and I wish there was like an easy answer, because I know as a writer myself, the submission process can be very discouraging sometimes, and it's not always about how good of a manuscript it is. There's so many different factors that go into it. So one, does it fit our niche? Does it fit what our reader expectations are at this point, as far as being based on real history rather than just a historical backdrop. And I guess the most important thing is do I find it interesting? And you can't really know for
Right.
sure. I guess you can look at our catalog, but you can't really know what's going to catch my interest or Robin's interest. Um, but that's important to me because when I sign an author to a contract, I have to. I'm working with this manuscript and with this book for
Yeah.
years, and so I'm not going to publish something that I just don't find that I'm not really interested in learning more about. In addition to that, obviously the writing needs to be strong, the craft needs to be strong, so there needs to be evidence that the author is skilled at creative writing and knows different how to harness different craft elements of plot and characterization and pacing and point of view and all those sorts of things. Professionalism is an important thing, ensuring that the submission guidelines are followed and that the cover letter is professional and succinct and all those sorts of things. And then in addition to that, we need things that are marketable. It's really difficult to make money as a publisher, not just for profit, but just enough to break even so that I can continue to publish more books. So I started the press with a lot of idealism about publishing great stories, and we still want to do that, but I have to also consider, is this a marketable product? And so there is a certain expectations that our authors are out there doing the work of connecting with their target audience and sharing their messages online and in person and growing their audience so that then we can partner with them to combine our audiences and continue to grow from there.
What lessons do you take from your early days as an author, submitting your book to someone else in hopes of being picked up, that you learned these lessons and you brought them into your business in History Through Fiction?
Well, the biggest takeaway for me is rejection hurts, but it's not about you. It's there's so many different factors that you can't know. You can't get inside the publisher's head, the editor's head, and know exactly why they chose what they chose. And I can kind of say the same thing as an employer. I am the general manager of a pizza restaurant, and I have to interview prospective employees, and I have to pick, and it's so hard to choose. I don't know. There's so many different things I have to think about, and you don't ultimately know until you actually hire someone, until you're actually working with them. So yes, rejection does hurt. It does take a lot out of a writer. And ultimately, you're always going to have an emotional response, but just know that most of the time it's not really about you, and you just need to keep working, keep following your heart and your passion, and keep doing the work. And ultimately, you will find a home, and you will find the kind of success you're looking for. As far as more practical things, I would just say make sure you actually study the person or the publisher that you're submitting to, the agent or the publisher, because you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste their time. So make sure that whatever it is you are writing fits their niche, it fits in line with what they've been publishing already, what they've been representing already, and that you do take a little bit more time on the front end to read those submission guidelines, respect those submission guidelines, and submit and just kind of show up and be okay with whatever the result is.
It seems like a common thing for you is the idea of fit, and that your authors fit where you're going as a company. When you're hiring somebody to flip pizzas, there's fit. We have to go work together in a community, and when somebody doesn't fit, it makes it difficult for everyone involved, right? So you want somebody to come in as an author working with you, and there's just this great working relationship. That seems really important to you.
Well, it's a partnership, and I'm sure you can relate to this. I work nights, weekends, whatever it takes, and I'm going to give you all everything that I can, and I expect in return to meet me halfway. Obviously, I don't expect people to give up their whole lives just for our little publishing company, but I expect them to be professional, to put in the work, and to get, it's a give and take. It's a partnership. It's we're all reaching for the same goals. We have the same goals in mind. And so when I'm looking for who to work with, who I'm going to publish, like I said, I'm going to be working with you for years once I sign an author to a contract. And so that partnership is very, very valuable, very, very important. And we always want to make sure we're starting off on the right foot and that it's the right fit.
I'm going to steal a legal term here, and I'm going to kind of lead the witness here in a second here, Colin. The power of podcasting for authors, making connection with an audience of readers. You have a show about this. I have a show about this. We're kind of on the same wavelength here as far as the power of getting your story in front of people by being a guest on a podcast. When you work with authors and it's publishing time and it's time to get out there and promote, what kind of things are you gently encouraging them around getting out and promoting? And like, why is being a guest on a podcast so important for authors?
Well, it expands your audience. There's so many different online channels out there. I mean, just look at your streaming services. It's endless, and you don't know always where your audience is. You're going to find your audience. Now, you're going to do a lot of target marketing to try and identify where they are, but you don't know what's going to strike a chord with someone. I mean, recently I've done a slew of interviews with authors that have written some kind of historical fiction related to music. Now, I am not into music, into classical music or any of that sort of thing, but there is a kind of a subgenre within historical fiction for all kinds of different musical histories that I know nothing about, but I know that we have people in our audience that will be interested in that. So not every author I bring on is going to be of interest to every single person in our audience, but there will be a subsect within our audience that's interested in this book or the ancient history, like having I can't think of the author's name now, but she wrote Babylonia, Costanza Casati, and all different kinds of subgenres within historical fiction. So it works the same way. When I'm on with you, not everybody in your audience is going to be interested in what I do, but there are going to be some people that are interested in that. And then I move on to the next podcast, or an author in any case you want to appear on as many podcasts as makes sense so that you can reach as many people as possible that then find your book and then talk about your book, because then it obviously expands from there when they write a review about it or they tell their friends or family about the book. And so it's just about getting that exposure. And with digital marketing, there's always like click rates and impression rates and all that stuff does matter. It's not something worth obsessing over, but it's the same thing with appearing on a podcast or appearing in media anywhere. You're going to connect with some people in that audience, and that will help you grow your audience.
A large number of my guests are first-time podcast guests. Some of them don't even know what a podcast is. Their PR agency has sent them to me, and they're like, "Is this a radio show? Like, are there people watching me right now?" They're completely confused by the whole process. I just think what's amazing about podcasting is you do this interview, you put it out into the world. Somebody's going to find this in the future and click play on this and connect with you years from now because they love the topic, the title. There's something about the episode that makes them curious. And podcasting just serves you in the background while you sleep and while you do other things and brings the potential new audience to you all the time, where social media is kind of quick, fast, in your face and gone and forgettable in some cases. This podcasting thing just keeps chugging along, creating this great communication between authors and readers. I think that's something that people should celebrate as often as possible.
Well, and for that matter, I will, if I am having an author on my podcast, I'll put their name into YouTube and I'll find an interview they did 2.5 years ago in order to help prepare me for my interview with that author.
Yeah. Well, I'm enjoying your podcast as a listener as well, just so you know, Colin. I love your guests. I love that you're using it to feature your own authors, but you're also bringing in authors from outside of your community to feature them as well. Keep me in mind because I love featuring authors from your your community. I'd love to have them come on my show as well. Give them another opportunity to get onto an author podcast. So keep me in mind. I'm always looking for great authors.
Definitely. I already sent a message to them, so hopefully one or two have filled out your form.
It's good. I'm a big fan of historical fiction, so we have that in common. So I like that. Let's talk about your own writing as an author yourself, Colin. Give us a little overview for the readers that are here. They're looking for a new author to fall in love with and support. Give us kind of an overview of what you've done to date and kind of give us the historical fiction of your journey as an author.
It's a long journey, and I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. I So I was talking earlier about going to school for history, and I went to graduate school in Mankato, Minnesota, and I was studying history. And I had an interest in the genocide of Western indigenous people, more of like, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And what have we learned from it? And while I was studying those things, I discovered that 38 Dakota men were hanged in Mankato, Minnesota, where I was attending school, as a result of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, which was an event that resulted in this hanging, along with the exile of all Dakota people from the state of Minnesota. And Dakota people are the indigenous people in this region that have been here since time immemorial. So that was shocking that I did not learn about the U.S. Dakota War until I was in my early 20s and attending graduate school, that I didn't learn it through my K through 12 education. And so that's what led me to do more research and writing related to the U.S. Dakota War. I had an academic degree in history. I knew nothing about fiction, but I did know that fiction is powerful, that storytelling can really grab people's attention, and historical fiction in particular can help engage people with the past in a way that kind of the dry textual nonfiction information can't. And so after a few years out of grad school, I decided that I would try my hand at historical fiction and write a novel about the U.S. Dakota War, because I thought this was an underrepresented history that's very important, that Minnesotans, that Americans should know more about. And so that's what I did. Unfortunately, I didn't know about the publishing process. I didn't know much about the actual science of storytelling and what it means to utilize those elements of craft. And so I was really just following my interest and following this passion for teaching people, or at least creating some sort of awareness about the U.S. Dakota War and its tragic results. And after writing several novels, which was, for me, was really just about discipline, sitting down, doing the research, doing the writing, doing the editing, getting some form of a narrative at the end that expressed the themes and the stories and the messages that I wanted to express. But through feedback and through reader feedback and editorial feedback, I kind of realized that I did not know enough about fiction. I had all this background in history, and I was giving informational text within my historical narratives that wasn't engaging. It was disengaging. And so I decided to go back to school and get a Master of Fine Arts degree in creative writing. I did that at Augsburg University from 2017 to 2019, and I learned a ton. I can't believe how much I learned, and I can't believe how much I didn't know. And it was hard because I still had to get over that hump, that preconceived notions about what a story was. And by the end of the program, I was just finishing up my fourth novel. It's called Resisting Removal. This one is actually about the Ojibwe who lived throughout northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, who also suffered a tragedy called the Sandy Lake tragedy, in which 400 Ojibwe perished at Sandy Lake, Minnesota in October and November of 1850, all based on the same policies that had created the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. After that, I started my press. I started getting more and more busy publishing books other than my own, but I also was working on my fifth novel called Reclaiming Minnesota. This one is an alternate history of the U.S. Dakota War, in which I kind of had to rely a lot more on these fictional craft elements, because now not only am I telling a fictional story based on history, but I'm actually twisting the history on its head and intentionally telling something that's not history. It's an alternate history that, in this case, has the Dakota and Ojibwe people joining forces, winning the U.S. Dakota War, and exiling the white settler population from the state. So rather than having the Dakota exiled, I'm having the white settler colonialists exiled as a sort of a way to help people really empathize with the native peoples and what happened to them, by at least looking at it from my own cultural lens in a different way. What if it happened to my family? What if it happened to my my culture that lost this land, and now the land has been reclaimed as Minnesota Makoche, a native held and governed land? That book did well, and I was lucky enough to win the Midwest Book Award in historical fiction for that book. And I have some more ideas, but now I'm so busy editing, publishing, creating content, doing podcasting that I'm not doing any writing right now. I will again someday. I just don't know when.
You have a lot going on, a lot. Do you miss the writing process, though, in the busyness of your day-to-day at the moment?
I
Yeah.
envy people
Okay.
who get to sit and do it, and I envy my authors that uh, get to continue to perfect their craft and work hard at of making their stories, completing their stories, and it is such a challenging and daunting process, but there's such something so rewarding in doing it. And I'm also a marathon runner, and I think of it the same way. Like, it's not fun. It's not fun to train for a marathon and to run a marathon, but it is so rewarding to put in the time, to put in the effort, and to get the result. And no matter what that result is, so I guess I like the process, and I would like to return to it. And also, like I said earlier, this history is so relevant, and I've gotten myself into some hot water over representation and misrepresentation, and is it okay for me to tell a story or not, and how do I tell a story, and who should I get permission from, who should I get feedback from, and all those things open up really important conversations. And at first I would get hurt by it because, I'm doing this with a pure, genuine heart. But I had to kind of take myself out of it. And now I'm old enough where I can listen to the different feedback and the different criticisms and know that I'm just a part of something much, much bigger. And I want to listen. I want to be open minded. I want to use those things, but I can't take it personally. I have to just take it stride for stride and move forward. So I do want to continue to contribute to those conversations. And those conversations are, thankfully, gratefully, are happening. And that's another very important thing about history, about historical fiction, is it helps us to look in a mirror and say, who are we, and how do we do better? And so those are the things that I miss. I miss the process. I miss contributing to the conversation. Like I said, I'll find a way to return to it, but for now I'm helping others tell their stories, really awesome, awesome stories, and helping them kind of get that reward from finishing the marathon.
What elements of research do you include when you write a book? Are you talking to certain people? Are you trying to be boots on the ground and go and see these places you're talking about in your books? What kind of elements do you use yourself personally when you're writing?
Well, I rely heavily on the work of historians. Historians do amazing job of, that's a craft in and of itself, of gathering many, many sources and finding a way to put them together in a way that is as historically authentic and real and accurate as possible, knowing that everybody that studies history, everybody that looks at history, conveys it through their own lens, whatever contemporary time they may have lived in, whatever that social implications might be. And so historians are really intelligent in being able to look at things through a lens of the context in which it came out of. And so they then piece that back together based on their own knowledge and their own experience, and create these really valuable histories that I rely on, that all historical fiction authors are going to rely on to get a better picture. And so I always start with the work of these historians with PhDs, university professors that put together these large texts of historical informational text. But not only do I get to then read the history, but they do what they are required to do, and they cite their sources. They say, this is where I found it. This is exactly where you can find it. Some of them are from secondary sources, other historians. Some of them are from primary sources. And we have all kinds of catalogs available. For me, it's at the Minnesota Historical Society where I can find those primary documents, or at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And you can really then create your own, you reconstruct your own history of what happened based on who you're looking for and what you're looking for. And then from there, the historical fiction author then fills in the gaps, because not everything, of course, is available through those historical documents. But it's really, really important to get all that information. And so that's what I do. I gather the facts first through secondary sources, then through primary sources. Yes, I will travel to the settings where things happened. I don't find a ton of inspiration from that, but I do think it is important and valuable to put yourself there. It's hard to talk to people because, unless it's a recent history, and plus, oral histories can be not always true or accurate, and you have to pair that with actual documented history. And then there are the challenges too, like I said, culturally, of representation and who's open-minded and who's willing to actually talk to me about these events that are so filled with trauma and tragedy and pain and loss and all those grief, all those sorts of things that are difficult to bring back to the surface.
Yeah, I had one author on my show, and he wrote a historical fiction book about Sherlock Holmes's daughter, which is a character he made up. But he was living in London for a while. He's from the U.S. So to explain what London fog feels like, you kind of need to experience it. It's hard to Google that. You need to actually walk. Mm-hmm. He walked the same streets that Sherlock Holmes walked. He went to the locations that he was known to be at. And it gave him a great context and like a foundation for his book so that he could come back home to the U.S. and write from that perspective. And I always thought that's really interesting when, if possible, to put yourself into that context and how that can kind of naturally just filter into your writing without really being intentional. It's just there, that you've been there and you felt that. It's not an option for everybody, but wherever possible. To feel what it feels like in the morning, to feel the sun come up over the hills, that type of thing, and put yourself there. I think there's something special if you have the opportunity to do that as an author.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to put it, that it naturally infiltrates your writing. It's not a requirement to go and to feel that fog in London, but it's going to add depth to your writing. And the reader, subconsciously, they can tell if you've been there or not. So yeah, that is important if authors can do that.
So for the listeners here, Colin, they're looking to fall in love with your books. If you could get up in front of a group of your readers and introduce your books for the first time, we've kind of talked about them already, but is there a common thread throughout your books that kind of tie them all together for the reader? So as they begin reading, you take them on a journey through all the different books that you have. What's that thread?
Well, as I said, I write about the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862, something that not a lot of people know much about. Yeah. And they're always asking me, well, which book do I start with? Because now I've written 5. I wrote in chronological order, but backwards. I don't know. Was there a word for that? So I start with 1862 because that's the watershed event, was the war. And I just give the history of who was involved, what happened, when did it happen. And once the reader understands this huge tragic watershed event, then they can go back and kind of understand why. So the next 3 novels that I wrote take you back in history so that you can see how this all developed. How did the relationships between the native peoples and the government develop between the settler colonialists and the natives, and how did the treaties and the reservation system kind of create this atmosphere where war eventually ensued. So I tell readers to start with the war itself, then go back and try to understand how that developed. And then my fifth book is really unrelated. As I said, it's an alternate history. That one is more for anyone who does know a little bit about the war, but wants to open up, be open-minded enough to think, well, what if it happened a little differently? How can I put myself in the shoes of the people that experienced this history?
Yeah, no, it's great. I think that's amazing. I like when somebody writes from your perspective and shares stories for other people. Not that we want to be the voice of those people, but we want to elevate the stories and the voice of what happened. And I think that's amazing. Have you had any kind of feedback from people who maybe are touched by the story or have experience through the stories that your story helped them reconnect with maybe their past, or that kind of feeling? Has that been something that's happened for you?
Yeah, to a startling degree, because there are people. I do a lot of events in outstate Minnesota, so outside of the Twin Cities and rural areas where people don't have things happening. They don't have events on every corner happening on every day of the week like we do here in the Twin Cities. So when I go to town, the community shows up, and they're really interested in what I have to say, and they're really interested in the stories that I've written, and they are so into it that I have to kind of admit to them, look, I did a little research. I wrote the story, but this isn't my life all the time, and I can't always give them the answers they're looking for. A lot of people are interested in their family history and an ancestor that they want to know more about and what happened to them, and they expect me to be able to point them in the right direction to this resource or that resource. And really, most of the time, this ancestor of theirs may have shown up in a report somewhere in the documents of the American military something, so I don't really know anything about them, nor do I really know how you could find out who they were and what they did and where they were and all those sorts of things. So yeah, there are people, especially who have some kind of family connection, and same thing with the Dakota people as well, that the history is very real and relevant to them because they have that family connection. But all I can do is say, this is who I am, this is what I did, this is what I have to offer. Now you go forth and do what you will with it. But I am surprised at just how much passion people have for those histories, and very specific, like local histories that, I'm not from that small town, so I don't know, I don't have the answers for them.
How important is it for you as an author to read the reviews of your readers?
That's I always read the reviews early on. Now I try to avoid reviews because I will look at the aggregate of reviews,
Okay.
because that does tell you something, but to look at individual reviews doesn't tell you much. Every reader comes to a story with their own viewpoints and their own expectations, and bad reviews are important because then it helps the right readers find your story. Maybe this wasn't for them, but what's difficult for me is I used to just look at the reviews of the books I wrote. Now I'm publishing books. I'm choosing what stories are published, and then I'm the editor. I'm forming these stories. I'm telling the author, hey, let's change this, let's do that. And then when somebody comes and writes reviews and like, why is it this way and why is it that way? And this didn't make any sense. And it's like, come on. I spent so much hard work, me and the author working together. So I don't read all the reviews anymore because it just stresses me out.
But a well-written, well-worded review that's supportive of the author, though, I think could be encouraging, especially for a new author who writes this kind of on their own and puts their words out going, I don't even know if anyone's going to read this. And then Sally and Dakota, she's like North Dakota, she's like, oh my gosh, it's the best book I've ever read. And I love the author did
Uh-huh.
this, this, and this. I can't wait for the next book. That's got to have some kind of impact for a new author to be like,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
likes it. Yeah.
It's extremely
Yeah.
fulfilling, and even just for that moment of okay, yeah, I did a good job. I got this right, and I made I helped someone. I encouraged someone. I gave someone a good story, and so yeah, that is definitely very fulfilling for the authors. For me, the publisher, it gives us some marketing that we can
Right.
use. We can quote those reviews and use that in social media and other places. Uh, the important thing is just to be careful with your
Yeah.
expectations, and that's something I always have to coach my authors through. I One historical fiction author that one of our authors looks up to, Sarah Penner. She's got I don't know 100,000 reviews for The Lost Apothecary, and they're mostly good. She's probably 4 stars overall, but then there's even hers has 8,000 one-star reviews. So it's hard when my authors will get a one-star review and it's just devastating. Well, you got one-star review. Meanwhile, the New York Times best-selling author, they're getting 10,000, 20,000 one-star reviews. That's why I say you got to look at it as a whole. And there is some good bits of wisdom, especially if someone actually takes the time to say why they didn't like a book. You can find out you can learn some things from that and how you craft your stories in the future.
Scott, they're calling. I could have you on here all day, just talking through your books and your writing and all the things you're doing. Tell us more about your website, and I kind of want to wrap up with a question, Colin, as we head towards the door here. But again, all the resources you have on the website, history through fiction. What can we anticipate? And again, where should we start first when we come to your website?
Well, first, I have to admit I've kind of overextended myself in my attempt to find as many people out there that are within my audience. I do want to point out I do have an author website, colinmustful.com. So if you're interested more about me as a writer and some of my background in Minnesota history, you can go to colinmustful.com. My publisher website is historythroughfiction.com. I have many different resources there. First of all, you can find the podcast. It's downloadable there, historythroughfiction.com/podcast. We have our blog where we publish a blog weekly, and those are usually related to writing or history or the history that is within our books. We do have a member area where we publish short stories. So if you are a short story writer and you write historical fiction, send us a short story. Those we do have a small $5 submission fee, but we do pay authors $30 when we do select their stories for publication. We publish those once a month, and it's only $5 for membership. It's five, and it's permanent. It's just a one-time $5 fee, and you can read those short stories. We have, what else do we have there? I just started a historical readers club. So I try to appeal to writers and readers. So we recently started a historical readers club where I publish content from history through fiction authors. Sometimes it's like chapters that were cut from their novels or short stories that they've written. We also publish book reviews there by someone who has a YouTube channel called The History Shelf, and she writes historical fiction book reviews there. So we publish those there. We have our events tab where I'm always doing Zoom panels called What's New in Historical Fiction. I do workshops, writing workshops, and other things like that. We're doing like a writing sprints. June 16th, we have one coming up. So that's on the events tab. And then if you just want to subscribe, that's the easiest way to get all this information that we're putting out. I send out a monthly newsletter on the first of each month, and then throughout the month I send a couple more about big announcements that we're having or events that we're hosting, things like that. So just historythroughfiction.com/subscribe. And I'm always doing a giveaway. So right now when you subscribe, you're entered for a chance to win a free signed copy of Gillian Forsberg's novel, The Porcelain Menagerie. So yeah, you can definitely, from our newsletter would be the easiest way rather than having me continue to go on and on about all the different content we have up
A
there.
lot of great resources, Colin. A lot of great things that people can tap into. And the fact that they could also have time with you in the future and maybe work with you, I think that's great. I want to point as many people to you as possible. Fill up that calendar, right? You've got a few minutes here and there you can spare, but send as many people to you as possible, because I think you're going to treat them well. I think they're going to have a great experience with you. They're going to learn a lot from you through your podcast and through maybe working with you one-on-one or having some time in your calendar. You have a lot of great resources for authors. So the more people that know about you, the better, I think. As we wrap up, Colin, what beyond winning an award for your book, which is amazing, congratulations for that, what else for you personally is so rewarding about being an author?
Well, I like working for myself. I like using my degrees. I wasn't able to find a job with my 2 graduate degrees, so I made a job. So that's really rewarding for me. And just as I kind of related with running a marathon, it's a lot of persistent hard work by yourself, just putting in the time, being disciplined, and being open to feedback, criticism, lessons, a lot of really hard lessons. And on top of that, because I've had so many hard lessons, I can pass that on when I'm working as a book coach, when I'm working as an editor, when I'm working as a publisher. I can now really mentor the people that I work with and say, well, I've experienced that. So here's what it's going to feel like. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you should be prepared for. And that's really valuable. And I'm glad I'm able to pass on all that knowledge and experience, as hard as it was to go through myself. But I think that helps my authors and the people that I work with not to have to. No, it's not unique to them. It's just something you got to go through as part of the process.
Excellent. We'll have links, Colin, to your website, your own books, and all the amazing things you're doing. We'll have links to your History Through Fiction as well. Everyone, you're done listening to us here, and you're like, oh, I wish there was a podcast I could listen to. Well, definitely go over and subscribe to Colin's podcast. Check out all the amazing authors that Colin features on his show, and you're going to get some really great perspective and insight into the journey of authors and great conversations as well. So I'd encourage you, like I enjoy it, I encourage you to go check out Colin's show as well and add that to your favorites. Like, subscribe, and follow. Do all the things we ask as podcasters.
Well, and one last plug.
Come on.
One last plug is I recently started a Substack, and that's really unfiltered stuff where I share, this is my day-to-day, this is what I'm working on, and I do have a 10-minute podcast there where I just get on and I say, okay, I'm working on cover design for this, I'm working on editing for that, I ran into this challenge here, we're trying to overcome this obstacle there. So I'd love if you check out my Substack, which is called Fictional Footnotes.
Nice, I'll have that in the notes as well. See? I'm new on Substack, so I'm looking at inspiring people like you and going, I like what Colin's doing. I'm going to borrow that. So that's amazing, Colin. Thank you so much for making time to be on the show.
Thank you, Dave. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5. Kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.